All right, let's look at some of the implications of Kantianism and that people sometimes struggle with, that they see as weaknesses of this ethical theory. Probably first and foremost is this idea that consequences are morally irrelevant. That can be a really difficult one for people to wrap their heads around because we're so used to correlating the quality of our actions to the results that they produce, right? That we think about what the effects of our behavior is on the world and on the others that inhabit it. And so for Kant to come along and say, don't concern yourself with what happens as a result of your actions, concern yourself with the actions themselves. That can be really difficult to get our heads wrapped around. It might be easier if we have some sort of authentic experience with religion and we've had an opportunity to experience that feeling of being obligated to do something that we might know is going to produce really unfavorable results, but nonetheless feeling the power of the directive or the commandment to do that thing. But if not, if we haven't had that experience, this can be a really difficult implication to accept. It can also be difficult for folks to grasp this idea that actions have intrinsic value and that intrinsic value, the value that inheres in the action itself, is really rooted in some sort of a logical principle of non-contradiction or self-defeat. And that can be difficult for people to see, to correlate morality with logic like that. But again, that's right at the heart of Kantianism. It can be really difficult for people to accept this idea that a good person isn't necessarily one who is motivated by the feelings that they have about other people and their experiences. That for Kant, ethics is rooted in logic and reason and goodwill, but not in empathy, not in sympathy, not in compassion or pity. And again, that can feel really counterintuitive to folks because how do we separate the way that I feel about this other person with the way that I think I should be acting in response to them? But, of course, as Kant says, don't concern yourself with those things. Your intention should not be feeling. Your intention should be to will as much good into the world as possible. You should do the right thing because you recognize it is the right thing to do and it's worth doing for its own sake. So again, this can be another counterintuitive kind of aspect of Kantianism for us to accept this idea that not only do the consequences of your actions not bear moral weight on your actions, but the situation that you're in shouldn't have anything to do with what you choose to do. We recognize that in some situations, maybe lying is morally impermissible. But in other situations, maybe it is. Like the proverbial, how do I look in this outfit? And the person really looks terrible. We ask Kant, look, in this situation, there's nothing at stake here. And that'll crush this person's feelings if I tell them they don't look good in this outfit and it may damage our relationship. So why don't I just tell the white lie? Like, hey, you look great in that outfit, even though I don't really think they do. And Kant would say, I don't care what the situation is. And I don't care what the consequences are. Lying is always wrong. And it's wrong because of its inherent logical properties, the act of lying. And it's wrong if you're not willing to if you're not trying to will as much good into the world. And we know that truth-telling and not lying is what the goods of the world are. So you're not motivated by the proper thing, and the action itself is sort of logically self-defeating or logically contradictory. So Kantianism is non-consequentialist and it's absolutist, right? Lying is always wrong in Kant's world. And this was one of the first challenges that was made to Kant when he first gave expression, in particular, to the categorical imperative. And somebody came to him and said, so you're telling me that there's no situation in which lying would be morally permissible? And Kant's like, no, there is no situation. Yes, that's what I'm telling you. There is no situation in which lying would be the morally permissible action. And so somebody suggested to him this. So you're saying that if you're hanging out at home one afternoon and your friend comes banging on the door in a panic and says, help, there's a crazed axe murderer who's after me and I need somewhere to hide. And so you open the door and you let your friend in, and then lo and behold, a couple of minutes later, guess who shows up at the door? The axe murderer. And the axe murderer says to you, did you just let so-and-so in the door? Or something to that effect. You're saying, Kant, that I can't lie to this axe murderer in order to save my friend's life that this axe murderer is trying to kill? And Kant said, that's absolutely what I'm telling you. Your obligation is to tell the truth, never to lie. So I'm not saying that you have to necessarily answer the axe murderer. But I am saying that you can't lie to the axe murderer. You can't do something like say, like, oh yeah, I just saw that person running down the street. Because for all you know, Kant says, when you let your friend in the door, your friend immediately scrammed out the back door of your house and started running down the street. And so you could, if you chose to lie to this axe murderer, you could actually unintentionally send them in the direction that your friend is actually traveling. In other words, you don't know what other people are going to do, and you don't know the consequences of other people's actions or the consequences of your actions. You can only guess at those things, Kant says. So your obligation is to deal with what you know, and what you know is the truth, and it's your obligation to tell the truth and not to tell lies. But again, it can be really difficult for people to get their heads wrapped around this. It's like, so you're telling me I shouldn't lie to the Nazis when they're banging on my door asking if I am hiding any Jewish people during World War II? Another sort of, it's not a problem with the implications of Kantianism, but it just can kind of feel funny to folks to completely remove emotion from our ethics and in its place substitute just pure logic. It can feel kind of cold and kind of heartless. It's not typically how we think about good people or moral actions as being completely divorced from feeling and sympathy and empathy and connection to others. There's also a problem in Kantianism of when duties conflict, right? What about if I have two things that I have to do, but they're in conflict with one another? Like say, for example, I make a promise. I'm going to pick you up at McDonald's at 1 o'clock tomorrow, but then my brother has an accident and needs me to take him to the hospital for help. And I have this imperative where I always have to provide help when I can, but it seems to be in conflict with this promise that I've made. What do I do? And there's no easy answer in Kantianism because everything is so absolute. Right? The situation doesn't matter. The consequences don't matter. What matters is our intention and the logical properties of the actions.